Hello, Healthy Ambition listeners. Today we've got a slightly different format. This is Healthy Ambition Medical, where I, Dr. Olivia Lesslar, who is the Chief Medical Officer for Healthy Ambition, is going to be interviewing someone very special. Usually you're used to Scott Laidler interviewing the best and the brightest athlete CEOs, and today I'm being joined by Dr. Joel Gould, a dentist from the US, who has some incredible information to share. So I've been in correspondence with Joel for the last, about maybe 5 or 6 months, and I've been blown away by what he has to say. So I'm really pleased that he's here to join us. Hi, Joel, welcome.
Hello.
So I kind of wanted to start off with your background, okay? Because we know that you're a dentist, fine, but tell us more about how you came to be who you are and what got you to where you are with regards to vitamin D, because that is a huge part, not all of it, but a huge part of your story, isn't it?
Right. Well, that's a very loaded question. So I went to dental school almost 30 years ago, and I'm from Canada originally, Central Canada. I've been in practice in Canada for 10 years, and then in the US for 20 years. I started my career as a public health dentist working for the government of Ontario, which is a province in Central Canada. And I worked in public health with children in the hospital system. I had hospital privileges, did general anesthetic dentistry, and then went on further to do private practice in Vancouver, British Columbia, a great city. And probably about almost 20 years ago, I decided that I wasn't happy in Canada and that my future really was going to be in California. There was just something about it that drew me there, and it wasn't really till sunshine. Well, it wasn't until much later that I realized that I think that as human animals we have some instincts that are left, and I was drawn to the sunlight. I was only ever happy in California. And I moved here about 20 years ago, and I currently practice general cosmetic dentistry in Manhattan Beach, which is a suburb of Los Angeles. And about 5 years ago, I was interested in something called sleep apnea. And I don't really know what it was about this disease that drew me to it. Dentists have to take continuing education courses. And after almost 25 years, there's a lot that I've seen. And this was interesting to me. I wanted to know more about this disease. And so I started to learn about it and take some continuing education classes. And then by accident, really completely, I found out that I had sleep apnea myself. And I found this out in learning how to do home sleep testing. And just, for people who don't know, a lot of people think that sleep apnea has to be diagnosed in a lab. And that used to be the case maybe 10 years ago or 5 years ago. But because of the cost and because of the strange situation of sleeping in an unusual place, home sleep testing is much more common. And so I wanted to learn how to do home sleep testing so I could help my patients and figure out how I would be able to treat sleep apnea, which is a very interesting syndrome. And just by accident, I had myself.
Before we go into sleep apnea, because that is actually, you said that you were diagnosed with sleep apnea, fine, but that's actually not the only time you had a brush with dis-ease, right? I mean, When we were chatting for, the last few weeks, I mean, your story is pretty remarkable. Could you go tell our audience where you were before that?
Sure. So, I was one of those sickly kids, and I had my tonsils out at age 4, and I was that kid. I was the problem middle child. I didn't do well in school. I couldn't focus. And I remember, having a lot of anxiety as a child. And, you don't really know if you have anxiety until later in life when you realize that you don't have it anymore. But, I didn't really think there was anything different about me until about the age of 14. And I had a very traumatic experience where I lost literally lost my shit in public. And I had an issue. And listen, everyone has their time and place where they can't make it to a bathroom. This is sort of what life, life can be like this when we live in this modern world. But at the age of 14, I got sick basically, and I started to have urgent, chronic, painful, embarrassing, humiliating diarrhea. And at that time, this would have been 1979, this is a long time ago. And I lived in Canada and I was brought to the doctor and they couldn't find anything wrong with me. I had to go through all these really horrific tests, barium enemas and swallows. And they came to the conclusion that there was nothing wrong with me and that, the doctor told my parents that maybe I was making this up for attention.
Oh my God.
And it's very tragic because this is really the hallmark of this syndrome because there's definitely something wrong, but doctors don't have any tests to figure out what exactly it is. Now, I remember that the current doctor said that I should see a psychiatrist, and my parents knew right away that I wasn't making this up. They could see that this was really having a profound effect on my life. And basically I was having chronic, urgent, painful diarrhea and terrible pain on my lower right quadrant. I started to lose weight as well, although I had been a sort of a chubbier, fat kid in high school. And so I found a new doctor who wanted to do this new test called the colonoscopy. And it was very exciting because this was new technology. There were fiber optics. And so this was a completely different test where right away, I still remember because I was awake during this procedure that the doctor showed me the scarred portions of my colon and the diagnosis was Crohn's disease. Mm. And this was an autoimmune disease. This was my first brush with the medical world. And, this was a disease that I was told was genetic and it was caused by my neurotic personality and my Eastern European Jewish genes, which I think is kind of laughable. And this diagnosis was really a good thing because I didn't know what was wrong with me. And it was great. This is, very common that there's something wrong, but until you have an official diagnosis, there's a lot of disease. Okay. I think we spoke about that is how sometimes just getting a diagnosis
Exactly.
is in itself, makes you feel
because you're heard, right? Because you're heard. And a lot of the time these, patients will come and see us and they have these debilitating issues, brain fog or whatever it is that can be due to all sorts of things. And a lot of the time, if a doctor doesn't know what's wrong with you, they tell you it's in your head. And that's one of the most damaging things that we can do to our patients. Yeah. I, for one, absolutely never do it. Because even if something is in someone's head, it's very real for them. And in your case, I mean, it wasn't just in your head. Like, there was some serious issues going on. Yeah. So you were ill for how many years?
Well, so at 14, I had my diagnosis and I was put on prednisone, which is shockingly still a medication of choice for allopathic medicine for the traditional gastroenterologist. I was placed on prednisone, which is really a horrific drug. And there's no worse time to be on prednisone than when you're just beginning to go into puberty. And so most of my early, adult life was just traumatic. It's bad enough at the age of 14, 15, just to go to school. This can be traumatic. Just, as in high school, kids could be me. But to have this added bonus of being obese or being fat, and then having this embarrassing bathroom disease, it was really tragic. I was afraid to go to the bathroom a lot. Many different reasons over the years. At first you could get beat up for being in the bathroom, and then this is embarrassing. A bathroom disease, it's very shameful and it's tragic. I mean, these are basic functions, but this is something that is very classic with this type of disease. Is that the shame that's associated with it? It's not just because of the fear of literally losing my shit in public. It's the mental anguish and anxiety of having this in the back of my mind.
You couldn't be a normal teenager, right?
No, not even close. Yeah. And it's tough enough to be a teenager at any point in time, but to add this is just, it's really unnecessary. So I lived most of my life like that. And, this is something that I just accepted because this is not the worst thing in the world. Sure, it's embarrassing and I had to plan my life around the bathrooms, but some people are in wheelchairs, some people can't see. There are much more serious disabilities or issues. And so this was just my life and this is who I was. I created an elaborate life based around my bathroom habits and hiding them and managing them. And I believe that people who have inflammatory bowel disease, Crohn's, colitis, and even IBS, that every one of us who goes through this knows that this is a really it takes up all the space in your mind.
Oh, yeah.
And instead of me focusing on what life is really all about, I had to cope with this completely ridiculous syndrome, and this was my life until the age of 48.
48. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
So recent then. So what was the light bulb? What happened? How did life change for you?
Right. Well, keep in mind that throughout my life, I lived in Vancouver. I went to multiple specialists. One specialist would say, do not eat any vegetables. It's the last thing you should do. The next specialist would say, eat only vegetables. It's the only thing you can do. And I had all this conflicting information. So when I moved to California, my symptoms receded, and I was really living the healthiest life that I had. And what I loved so much about California, I came here to play ultimately beach volleyball. It's my true love. And the best part about living at the beach is that there's a bathroom every quarter mile. I know some people, they wouldn't be that excited, but to me, this was a place where I could feel comfortable, because really, this is a horrific disease that just destroyed my confidence. So when I moved here, I found a new doctor. I wanted to know what the latest medications were. And each, maybe 3 to 5 years, I would just try and see, well, what else is out there for me? I went to a guy who wanted me to go on Imuran. And, at this point in time, the internet was finally there, and you could actually Google these things. And when I looked at it,
which is the best thing for patients and the worst thing for patients. But anyway.
Yes. Anyone can be a WebMD. Yep. But I literally was like, well, I'm not going on that, because I would prefer, this is my life. I have maybe 10, maybe 15 bowel movements in a day. And I have a routine. I have my favorite places that I stop at. I have my safe bathrooms. I have my route to work. I planned my life around my bathroom issues, and I just made the best of it, because really, what are you going to do? This is a genetic disease, and what's the point of complaining about it? Because what am I going to do? Yeah. So I made the best life possible, and I just put it aside, and I forgot about it. I thought, this is who I am. I have this stuff. The other thing is that I was obese for most of my life, and I would say that I had the body of Homer Simpson, which is a dad bod, and it didn't matter. I'm a smart guy, and I'm capable, and I was successful, and I hired personal trainers and private chefs. I had meals delivered to my door. I tried every fitness program. It didn't seem to matter how hard I worked out. It just didn't work. And it wasn't that I was grossly obese, but I figured that with the money, resources, and effort that I was willing to put in, that I could transform myself into what I had always wanted to be, a fit, healthy person. At a certain point, I kind of just gave up and said, well, this is genetics. You have this dad bod and you're stuck with it. You better just cope with it. And, bad combination is diarrhea, gas, and a dad bod. It's not really a huge confidence builder, but, some people are, I guess some people are just unlucky, right? So how did this all, so how did this all change is completely by accident. And that brings us back to the sleep apnea discussion, because when I discovered I had sleep apnea, it didn't make sense to me. I was traveling around the country to different camps of dentists who were looking at sleep apnea with a different perspective. One group said, well, this is a very unique disease. It's caused by a tongue that's too big. And there's one guy, I don't want to disparage anyone, but they came up with all these crazy reasons, like it's a 6-foot tiger and a 3-foot cage is your tongue. And I mean, this is silly stuff. And so all these different dentists were looking at this like this is a structural issue. There's something wrong with your airway. It's not big enough.
That's what I was taught in medical school.
Yeah. This is caused by obesity. First of all, it's your fault. You're a fat person. You don't take care of yourself. You don't care about yourself. And this is your punishment. It's such a horrific disease that when I first started to ask my patients if they'd heard of sleep apnea, they would literally raise their hands and recoil in revulsion and shout, not me, I don't have it. And it's really sad, because you can't know if you have it. Only a sleep study will tell. And
and just for our listeners, can you actually tell everyone a little bit about sleep apnea?
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, sleep apnea comes from the word apnea, which is Greek for without breath. And what this is this was a syndrome that was first noticed maybe 25, 30 years ago, that older obese men stopped breathing, sitting bolt upright, after surgery. And, because of the way the world works, is that we looked at these obese people and said, well, this obesity must be stopping the airflow. This fat neck, this big neck is clogging the airway. And so we need to look at the syndrome. This is a disease of obesity. This is caused by obesity. But if we look into the history, we can go so far back as to Dickens. And there's the posthumous papers of, what's his name? There's a whole Dickens story on this. There was a character called Fat Joe. And that's Fat Joe, not the rapper that people would know these days.
Slightly different.
Yeah, this character, he was known, he was obese, he was hungry all the time, he would fall asleep. And, this was a character. And so they came up with this name called Obesity Hypoventilation Syndrome. And they said, and this is real. And they said, well, this is a syndrome that these fat people who don't care about themselves, their obesity and their fat tongue is clogging their airway. And
so different from snoring. Is snoring a symptom of apnea?
Well, that's a great question, but that starts to get into what is the root cause of apnea. So these days, snoring is a classic symptom, but if you snore, it doesn't mean that you have apnea. And if you don't snore, it doesn't mean that you don't. So snoring is simply a loud noise that your soft palate makes as it vibrates. And that vibration can be caused by a lot of different things or be amplified. If you can't breathe through your nose, there's a greater pressure. It may increase your snoring, but snoring in itself is not an indication of apnea. What it really is an indication that there is an issue with the control of the actual musculature of the airway, which is starting to bring us closer to what apnea really is.
So if that's the case, then do you see apnea in slim people, in children?
Right. So even though this is so far down the pipeline, almost everyone still views apnea as a disease of obesity.
Yeah.
And my patients will even say, oh, I used to have apnea, but I lost a lot of weight and I don't have it anymore. And, I love my patients and I've learned everything in life through them. So I don't want to give them a hard time, but that means nothing. Okay. What I started to see and what really kind of changed my perspective is when I started to learn about apnea, I was looking for the classic apnea patient. I was looking for the older, obese person with comorbidities. And comorbidities are, different diseases that come together. These people had high blood pressure, diabetes. And so these comorbidities, I was thinking, well, what's wrong with these people? What's wrong with their health? And then,
but Joe, what is it common then for a dentist to be doing sleep apnea stuff or to be looking for sleep apnea in their patients? Because I always thought of sleep apnea as being in the realm of the doctor, the physician, as opposed to the dentist.
Sure. Well, we have to think of it a couple of different ways. So medical doctors don't have any tools to treat sleep issues. They can give you a prescription, and we know that's maybe a short-term fix. But what they do when they don't know what to do, when someone says, listen, I'm not sleeping right or I have insomnia, they refer you to a medical sleep doctor. And everyone has this perception that there's these great sleep specialists and you're going to go to their office, check in at the front desk, and there'll be, pictures of sheep jumping over clouds. And the reality is these sleep doctors, what they do is they schedule you 3 months out for a sleep study in the lab, and then they don't even talk to you. You leave that sleep study with a Cpap, and then you go home with this machine that you didn't ask for, and your spouse certainly wasn't expecting you to come home with. And then you're supposed to plug it into the wall and put this thing on your face and then sleep with this for the rest of your life. This is insane. And so dentists got into this because I guess, we have a completely different perspective. There's two really big issues. Number one is that I know my patients. I don't just see them for a quick prescription. I spend an hour and a half with them when I do a root canal or a crown, and I get to know who they are. I know their children. I know their parents. And I'm in the community. And then the other thing is that I see these people lying flat down with this bright light shining directly into their airway. And this is a view that no one has. Even when your doctor sits with a light and puts a little popsicle stick in your airway, it's completely different. So when I started to hear about apnea, I got interested because I didn't want, I didn't know what this was all about, but I heard that dentists could make these specific devices that would stop snoring, could potentially treat apnea. So I started just to educate myself, and I started going to continuing education lectures just to learn about this. So the reality is that because there is no specialty in medicine that really understands this, this has fallen into the lap of the dentist because nobody wants to wear these appendages, these CPAP things. And dentists have an alternative option. And so, the other thing is that we are real doctors. We're doctors of the mouth, and we have a different view of health. And I think that we're really well suited to this type of treatment. I think it's a good fit.
Yeah. So just for our audience, could you explain what CPAP is and the theory behind why it helps with sleep apnea or snoring?
Sure. Okay. So the basic syndrome is that for whatever reason, you stop breathing. Now, what a CPAP does is, first of all, it stands for continuous positive airway pressure, CPAP. Okay. Everyone calls it a CPAP, whatever. But what this does is it's a mask that you strap on your face, and it blows air down your airway, either through your nose or your mouth or both. And there's straps that get stuck on your face. And what it does is it blows this air constantly down your airway to keep the airway open so that the airway doesn't collapse. And that's the issue with this syndrome, is that there's a collapse of the musculature of the airway. And what ultimately happens is the tongue itself can fall back and clog the airway. Once the tongue falls back, it gets stuck and a negative pressure starts to build up. And then your oxygen starts to go down. And you have specific chemoreceptors or baroreceptors. These are that register your oxygen content, the pH of your blood. And when your body starts to realize that there is no oxygen, it starts to freak out. And your body literally thinks that you're under attack. And it goes into the fight or flight mode. And you release a ton of adrenaline and a hormone called cortisol. And your body's literally thinking that there's a lion or a tiger attacking you and that you're in for the fight of your life. And what happens is that in this mode, your body shunts all the blood away from your digestion and all of your important duties to give you extra human strength, shunt blood to your muscles so that you can run. And that's where your fight or flight comes from. You're going to fight to the death with some animal, or you're going to run away. And the only issue is that this is happening to people when they're safe at home in their bed,
in the middle of their
attacked
sleep
by their own tongue.
Well, actually, and that's one of the reasons why a lot of patients don't realize that when they go into this fight or flight mode, that they stop producing ADH, which is antidiuretic hormone. In other words, that's one of the reasons why they get up to urinate in the middle of the night. Multiple times because multiple times because it's sympathetic.
But they think it's normal. They think they're waking up to go pee, and they don't understand that this is the
syndrome. It's not meant to happen. Yeah, exactly. Okay, so you and I both know the dangers of sleep apnea, hardcore snoring, not getting enough oxygen to the brain, and that's why our patients, when they wake up, they're groggy. They wake up tired. They're sleeping during the day. They're falling asleep at the wheel. All that kind of stuff. But not just that. They're at risk of cardiovascular disease, increased stroke. When patients use CPAP, do they actually get benefit from it? Is there studies to show that they actually do improve?
Sure.
Years of using it?
Well, you have to think of it this way, is that your body will have a choice, breathe or sleep. And you can't live for more than 3 minutes without oxygen. So breathing wins every time. And what happens is that normal sleep begins to be destroyed. And as you start to descend into these deeper stages of sleep, your airway becomes too relaxed. And then your body rouses you out of this deeper sleep, and it completely fragments the normal sleep cycle. And the end result is a couple of things. Number one, of course, you're exhausted. You are not getting into the deeper reparative stages of sleep. But on a whole different level, you are literally fighting for your life all night long. I wrote an article called Fight or Flight at Night, which is really what this is. You're supposed to be resting, and here you are literally, your body has no idea what's going on because it thinks that you're literally just being attacked by some predator. And then this goes on for a while, and it really starts to wear you down. So obviously, falling asleep at the wheel is massive. Anytime you hear of a big train derailment or accident, it's always the person falling asleep at the wheel. Always. This is for sure. Okay. The next thing is that hypoxia, lack of oxygen, does two really bad things. Number one is it kills brain cells. Okay. And number two is it speeds the development of diseases like cancer, okay? Now, when people start to think about these brain cells dying, you have to understand that brain cells are sensitive to oxygen, and the first ones to go are the biggest, most sensitive ones called the Purkinje fibers of the cerebellum. That's the part of your brain that coordinates all of your muscle activity. And once this starts, you should probably be starting to think about, well, it kills brain cells. The prefrontal cortex, that's your recognition, that's your short-term memory, that's you recalling names. And what starts to happen is people start to have difficulty really just with their cognition. And immediately you should be thinking about neurodegenerative diseases, because I don't believe that they're going to find a special gene splicing therapy or CRISPR that's going to eliminate Alzheimer's or Parkinson's or dementia. These are the diseases of improper aging. These result from multi-different factors, but primarily having hypoxia over and over and having a pillow shoved over your face all night long ultimately kills brain cells. So this is one of the root causes of our long-term breakdown in neurodegenerative disease. So now there's a lot of associations with sleep apnea, all these other diseases. And what I learned was that maybe sleep apnea causes these, but I actually don't believe that anymore. I believe that sleep apnea is an additional symptom of a larger disease of the autonomic nervous system or the brainstem itself. Now, the reason that we look at sleep apnea as a separate disease is that you can hear snoring. It's loud and annoying, and you can feel tired. Now, every single thing that the autonomic nervous system controls is also being affected, but you don't feel circulatory issues or digestive issues initially. You may have IBS and you may have cold hands and cold feet, low blood pressure, or even high blood pressure, but it's those sleep symptoms that are so important, because all of life is just a balance of like wear, tear, and repair. And if you're busy all day, you need to rest, restore, and regenerate at night. And the lack of that regeneration results in the breakdown of our biology, and everyone breaks down differently.
Yeah, I mean, like, thanks to all the sleep science stuff that's coming out in the last few years, which is making some serious headway and seems to be, like, thankfully sort of percolating down into to doctors and to mainstream. You know, we know that we need to get into slow wave sleep, you know, phase 3, phase 4, to be able to open up the lymphatic system and wash out the brain and clear out all that metabolic waste and all that.
Yeah.
But so you're actually going back to, you've got the sleep apnea portion of your story. What else is going on? What other pieces did you find out in your little detective?
Well, okay, so and this is really like the solving one of the most organic mysteries, because what literally happened, I'm an analytical person. As a dentist, dentists are very specific. We have to do a lot of different things that other people don't need to do. In medicine, you know, you can make a diagnosis and give somebody some medication and they go home and they heal themselves. We have to fix things. We're like carpenters of the body. And so when I found out I had sleep apnea myself, it didn't make sense. I was the thinnest I'd ever been, and I take care of myself. I take vitamins. I go to the gym. I eat healthy. I follow my doctor's orders. Why would I have the syndrome? And then through my research, I found a neurologist online, and she was saying, hey, everyone, I think that sleep apnea is actually a result of a vitamin D deficiency. Now, I had learned about vitamin D in school 30 years ago. I learned it was a vitamin that helps you absorb calcium from your foods. And that was important because my teeth and my bones are made of calcium. And, you know, I drink milk, I drink juice, I eat healthy. And I wasn't even thinking, you know, I spent a ton of time outside. I wouldn't even be thinking that I'd be low on vitamin D, but I never really thought about it. And no one had ever tested my vitamin D level. It wasn't on my radar, and it wasn't on any of my doctor's radar. And I specifically went to the doctor and asked for a vitamin D test, and the guy forgot to do it. And I had to go back again.
Who was the neurologist, out of interest?
So the neurologist's name is Dr. Stasia Gomanak, and you can find her at drgomanak.com. And she's genius. She was discovering that she had a lot of headache patients, and none of her headache patients had true apnea, but they didn't have normal sleep. And she didn't know what was wrong. And so by accident, she put these pieces together, and she became fascinated in vitamin D, and then, you know, started to research it. And it's her work that I modeled my sleep restoration program around. And what happened to me was I thought, well, I don't want sleep apnea, and I'm going to supplement my vitamin D. And so I learned everything there is to know about vitamin D. When I want to know something, I get into it. And I bought every book, I read every article, listened to every podcast. And pretty quickly, I realized this was a very big deal. This is a scandal. I did not learn about this in dental school. It's not taught right now. And I found a very unique and interesting character. Strangely enough, another Canadian dentist by the name of Weston Price. And I asked myself, and who the hell is this guy? And why didn't I learn about him in dental school? So I asked my friends who were still in dental school if they were hearing about this guy. They didn't have a clue. He's still not taught. I called the dean of my dental school and said, hey, dude, what's up? He didn't want to talk to me.
And what was Weston Price's message?
Well, so on a very simplistic way, Weston Price published a book called Nutrition and Physical Degeneration in 1937. That book did not go viral, but this man was a genius. This is at a time before antibiotics existed. This was at a time before we knew what DNA was. And he was practicing in an era where Adolf Hitler was euthanizing people in Nazi Germany. And the current medical paradigm in the US was one called eugenics. And it was the understanding that it was the mixing of races that was causing the breakdown of our health. And, here we are 90 years later, and, not much has changed. But at that point in time, Weston Price had a different idea. He traveled around the world, 5 continents and 13 countries, and he literally went to all of the existing Aboriginal populations that were still isolated and not living a modern life, because he wanted to go to the locations where people's teeth were not destroyed. What we were seeing at that time is that there was a huge amount of dental decay, massive amount of gum disease, and people were having their teeth pulled and having dentures. That was the standard of care. He wanted to find the places on earth and investigate the peoples who still had healthy teeth. And he was interested to see, why are people's jaws smaller? Why are they getting crowded? And so he found these populations of Aboriginal peoples and he photographed them. And this is genius, because he already knew that to get his message across, he was going to have to present this in a very different way. His colleagues, they were not interested in what he was doing. He was the first dentist and or doctor, medical professional, to identify something called epigenetics. Now, genetics are your own genes, your DNA, but epigenetics is the science of how you turn those genes on and off based on the environment. So here was this dentist, not a real doctor, and he was saying, hey guys, I know you all want to blame this racism stuff and people with darker skin are less evolved than us, but I kind of think it's the environment. And here we are all this time later, and his information is still not known. And what he saw was when these people left their Aboriginal lifestyle and became more modern, wore clothing, left their tribal life, and began to eat Western food, and leaving all of their ancestral habits, they lost their immunity. Their mouths and their airways and their jaws became destroyed, and they literally lost their health and became just like all of the people he was seeing with terrible teeth.
Okay, so we've got you were reading up on this particular neurologist who was saying that it was vitamin D. Did Weston Price say that it was a vitamin D issue as well, or he alluded to it?
There was two. So Weston Price found that it didn't matter where in the world, every single group of Aboriginal people had 2 substances that they would always give for fertility. If there was a young couple that were going to get married and have children, they would feed these ceremonial foods to them, which turned out to be cod liver oil, which is very high in vitamin D, and something called Activator X, which was a butter fat, which turned out to be vitamin K2. And it was the combination of these 2 chemical elements, vitamin D3 and vitamin K2, that imparted this natural immunity. Just these 2 substances, that was it.
Okay. And did you then experiment on yourself with vitamin D3?
Well, so keep in mind that when you don't know something, you don't really know what you're doing. So what I did was I had done enough research and I wanted to raise my level. So I had read all these horrific claims that medical industry was making don't take too much vitamin D. It's toxic. If you take more than 4,000
It's fat
IU or
soluble.
international units, you're going to have calcified kidneys, and this is dangerous. You're going to die. If you take more than 4,000 IU, this is toxic. And it didn't make any sense to me. So the more I read and the more I investigated, I thought, I'm going to slowly increase my vitamin D. And at the time, I was doing a podcast called Get Your Smile On with Dr. Joel Gould. And I don't know what compelled me to want to be a communicator, but at the same time this is going on, I started to investigate this vitamin D stuff, and I ordered all the books. And I ordered a book from Dr. John Cannell, who is the founder of the Vitamin D Council, and Michael Hollick, who is the doctor who discovered the vitamin D hormone, because vitamin D is a hormone, it's not a vitamin. And I invited these guys. I literally called them up and said, would you be on my podcast? And they said yes. And you can watch or listen to those podcasts. They're on my YouTube channel. I remastered them. And to hear me investigating this is mind-blowing, because I was literally trying to figure this out. Yeah. And so my vitamin D level came up past 80. And it took about 3 months. I found a couple of other different things. I discovered some other missing elements, the K2 component, magnesium, and ultimately something called organic sulfur. And within about 3 months, I literally woke up one day and said, wait a second, I'm not sick anymore. My neck pain and my back pain was gone. And I thought that was from being a dentist. My anxiety and depression that I was on medication for had disappeared. But my Crohn's disease disappeared. I had a nagging sensation in my lower right quadrant, and this chronic visceral angst of this disease, it just literally disappeared, and I couldn't believe it. And so I called up Stasha Gomanek. We had become friends at this point in time, and I said, what the hell? And she said, oh, Joel, I'm so sorry that you were fat and you have Crohn's disease. And I just went on to PubMed, and for anyone who doesn't know, PubMed is the website that doctors go to when they don't believe something. I didn't believe this. And I typed in Crohn's disease, vitamin D, PubMed, and enter. And wouldn't you know, there was a couple of studies where they took 20 or 18 people and gave them vitamin D, and all of them had remission of their disease. And I printed out these studies to take to my gastroenterologist, but he could have cared less. And so these studies exist, but they're small because nobody who has the money to do larger studies can get funding. And so these small studies showed me right away. And as I started to understand what is going on here, the deeper I got into vitamin D, I realized this was nothing that doctors were even understanding. And the level of deception of what this hormone is and what it does in our bodies is so profound. And even as we talk today, this was 5 years ago. It's 5 years later. And this has not changed. Doctors don't respect vitamin D. They don't think it's important. They think it's a vitamin you get from milk. And this is at the root cause of the human animal's illness. It turns out that humans are solar-powered animals, and vitamin D is just one of the things that we make in our bodies from sunlight. And this is insane. Big Pharma has completely convinced these doctors that these drugs that they're making, this is the cure to what's wrong with people. They don't care about these quacky vitamin things. That's ridiculous. That's not for real doctors.
So did your sleep apnea get better as well because of the vitamin D?
Well, so that's a little bit of a different story. I created something called the Sleep Restoration Program because sleep is very unique. And what I discovered is that if you are vitamin D deficient and you have poor sleep, you can repair it simply by raising your vitamin D level depending on how long you've been vitamin D deficient and how long you've literally been choking in your sleep. At a certain point, you cross this threshold, and I call it the point of no return, where the amount of hypoxia and the brain cell death has crossed a critical line, and no amount of vitamin D will ever give you back your normal sleep program. Your sleep program, what controls your descent into sleep and the control of musculature of your airway, this is fried like a short circuit. And it doesn't matter. You can raise your vitamin D level to 100. It's not going to make a difference. Once the brain itself and its sleep program is damaged, you need to do something completely different. And that's what I've been working on is my sleep restoration program, which we can get into. But, for children, this is the tragic part. If you're listening to this and you have a child that grinds their teeth or snores, you must act now. they're extremely vitamin D deficient, and their pediatrician doesn't know anything about this because they are not taught about vitamin D in school, and you don't know what you don't know. So they don't know what's wrong with your child, and they'll make up excuses. They won't say, oh, I don't know why your child's grinding their teeth. They don't know. The reason is the part of the brain that regulates the airway during the paralysis and sleep is malfunctioning. And it's the easiest thing in the world to fix when these children are simply supplemented with vitamin D3, vitamin K2, and some magnesium. This snoring and pediatric sleep apnea and bruxism can be eliminated in as little as 2 days and for sure 2 weeks. This is when this disease is the easiest to reverse before there's been too much damage. This is the most important message I want to get across to any parents out there. Your doctor doesn't know this. They did not learn this in medical school, and you don't know what you don't know. You have the power to change the trajectory of your child's life, and you need to act now. This is serious.
So in medical school, we were, a lot of the times when we talk about bruxism, which is grinding of your teeth, right?
Yes.
Is that it's due to stress.
Yes.
All these children.
Why not jump up and down or clap your hands or click your heels? Why grind your teeth? Mother Nature doesn't make mistakes. We need our teeth to eat and chew. Why would she have us destroy our teeth from grinding? And everyone says that. I ask my patients even today, even after 5 years of telling them to take vitamin D and saying this is the root cause of bruxism, they say, oh, I'm under a lot of stress. Well, the stress that you feel is you choking in your sleep. And the bruxism is just an outward sign of the syndrome. And the anxiety comes from poor sleep.
I don't know if you're happy to get into sort of more of the mechanisms of action. I know that this might be a little bit more in depth than what our listeners are used to, but could we talk about mechanisms? Well, how does vitamin D, how does exposure to sunlight help with sleep apnea?
Right. On the most basic level, vitamin D is the energy of the sun in your body, and humans are solar powered animals. Of course, we are the evolutionary descendants of plants. We're just the further down the food chain. And all of life that evolved on this planet evolved in cycles of light and dark, day and night. And of course, the energy of the sun is hardwired into our bodies and our systems because sunlight itself is instrumental in the evolution of life on this planet. So of course, this makes sense. But what this comes down to is that going back to that talk about your genes and epigenetics, vitamin D is a very profound epigenetic moderator in that vitamin D goes to your DNA and opens it up to allow you to copy your own DNA. And this is how our bodies operate. Your genes are set up in a specific way that we copy these stretches of your DNA that are technically your genes, although it's much more complex than that. But we make all these different proteins and especially enzymes. And enzymes are the worker bees of your cell. They cause reactions. So when your vitamin D level is low, your body thinks it's winter and it cannot access all of the genes that make you who you are. I call this human power saving mode or permanent winter because you do not have enough energy of the sun in your body. And think about your phone. When you barely have 20% energy left in it, your battery life, what happens? Well, it tells you, hey, going into power saving mode, and it's going to shut down all non-essential functions. Well, humans have a power saving mode, and that is described by the season. And when the vitamin D level is low, that has told our bodies throughout all of evolutionary history that it's winter. And we are the descendants of many thousands of generations of hunter-gatherers that in times of very low sunlight, winter, we'd have to power down because we are literally solar-powered animals. And that power saving mode was only ever supposed to be temporary until the brighter light and the longer days of spring and summer. So what happens is that you can consider, these are all the genes that you have. And as your D level drops, your access to all those genes is restricted. Now you're left with this little stretch of your own DNA. These are the genes that keep you alive. You want to be in this zone because you want to be able to make all the proteins and enzymes that keep you healthy. And everyone knows about free radical damage. And, we believe we have to eat these blueberries that is going to help reverse this free radical damage, which is great. But we actually make special enzymes that reduce free radical damage. These are our antioxidant enzymes, and these are created by copying our DNA, and we need vitamin D to copy our DNA. So at the most basic level, how we access our genes or turn these genes off and on requires us having an evolutionary level of vitamin D which is much higher than anyone on this planet is currently walking around with, unless you don't have a day job and you live in a nudist colony.
Right. So I can see that vitamin D is essential for the immune system, right? I mean, it helps transcribe what, over 500 genes,
well, I think
something like that.
I think there's 3,000. They say I've heard as high as 3,000 genes are specifically vitamin D dependent, and these are all the genes that are associated with seasonality, your diet, procreation, bringing a baby in. Where animals usually get pregnant at the end of the summer when their vitamin D level is the highest, and humans aren't that different. So if you are having fertility issues and you don't know your vitamin D level, you need to find a new doctor.
Yeah. So with the vitamin D, I can see the immune system pathway for sure.
Oh, okay. So what does it do? Yeah. Okay. So the part of the brain that regulates two separate things, the actual sleep program, there are specific areas of the brain called nuclei, and these are specific bunches of neurons that have come over the many millions of years of evolution to be the pacemaker cells, or the actual CPU, or the heart of the computer that literally has and runs the programs that control everything. And the autonomic nervous system is our primitive brainstem, and you could consider the autonomic nervous system as your automatic nervous system that just runs all of your housekeeping duties that you don't have to pay attention to. Yeah. So the one most simple discovery that Dr. Stasha Gomenek made is that without an evolutionary level of vitamin D, probably 60, you cannot transcribe or open your DNA in those neurons to create a specific enzyme called choline acetyltransferase. This enzyme produces acetylcholine, which is the primary neurotransmitter of the parasympathetic nervous system. This is the part of your brainstem that wants to gear down for sleep. You have your fight or flight, and then this is your rest and digest, and you can't rest if you don't have enough acetylcholine. So just that one thing alone, a lack of acetylcholine, is at the root cause of this. Now, it's much more complex than that, because now we're getting into the B vitamins and the microbiome, because there are several more complex components. One is simply a power generating deficit, in that your mitochondria in those neurons are not producing enough energy, or ATP, adenosine triphosphate, which I like to call human electricity. Those neurons are not creating enough energy to run the programs properly, number one. Number two is the B vitamins. When your vitamin D level goes down, you can no longer host the healthy microbiome that is related to summer. In summer, we have a high degree of vitamin D because it's sunny, and that allows us to maintain the microbiome that we prefer for summer, which is one that's very high in B vitamins. B vitamins are your energy vitamins, and they help you build muscle, and they do everything that we need. When the D level goes down, the B vitamins disappear, or they're greatly decreased, and that's power saving mode. Now, these B vitamins, I call them Mother Nature's helpers. These are interdigitated into every single chemical reaction in your body, especially in your mitochondria. The B vitamins are both the cofactors and the actual substrate, or the pieces of different neurotransmitters. And Mother Nature's not stupid. She recycles. She is green. She invented recycling. And we make these vitamins in our gut, and they do everything. We use them for every different type of thing. And if you look deeply into almost every disease syndrome, you're going to find a minimum of 2 different B vitamin deficiencies.
Yeah, so actually this is precisely why, when we were talking about this before, it's precisely why when people drink alcohol, possibly to excess, they snore. Is that right? And it's because of a, yeah. It's because they're depleting their B vitamins. Yeah,
and that's exactly it. And this is frightening when you understand what these B vitamins are and what they're doing, and how they are literally regulating your brainstem. And what lowers your B vitamins? Exercise, stress, drinking alcohol, and being in the sun. When you're in the sun, the actual sunlight breaks down a lot of your body, and the B vitamins are critical to help repair the DNA itself. So, it's a trifecta of dangers: being in the sun, exercising, and drinking alcohol. You need to supplement your B vitamins. And, we need to have increased B vitamins because our B vitamins are under attack. Our gut bacteria, under attack from our environment, are not producing the volume of B vitamins that we need. And never mind that we're not eating organ meats and liver that's very high in B vitamins. So this is a plight. Our B vitamins exactly mirror the plight of the bees that are under attack by pesticides like glyphosate, electromagnetic radiation, and toxins in the environment. Those bees, they're critical to our health as a species because they pollinate all the plants on this planet. But it's so interesting that they parallel our own B vitamins, and they're literally under attack by the same root cause, same toxins.
I think that a lot of patients don't actually realize that a lot of their B vitamins are actually being made in their gut by bacteria, which is why vegans tend to be B12 deficient. And it's because they're not getting, and everyone's talking, oh, it's because they're not eating meat and all that kind of stuff. But it's because a lot of the vegetables that they're eating don't have the bacteria from the soil anymore.
Yeah.
And those bacteria that would have been attached to those vegetables back in the day is making the B12 in their gut.
Right. Well, and then so that opens the door to this idea is that the microbiome of the soil is like the microbiome of your gut. And when we have monocrops and this massive factory farming, they kill the soil thinking that this is a good thing. And so we're getting these crops that are nutritionally completely devoid of B vitamins. And even worse, they're literally spraying all of these crops with glyphosate, which is a pesticide. And the glyphosate is terrifying because it actually attacks the enzymes that produce the B vitamins in the gut. And this is the syndrome. I have in my book, The Modern Epidemic, I have a lot of cartoon characters, and I have a whole troop of enzymes, and these are the shikimate enzymes. There's 7 different enzymes that make your B vitamins in your gut, but they also make, I think, tryptophan, serotonin. These vitamins are getting killed by the pesticides, and people don't understand that we didn't get our vitamins from food anyway. That would be way too dangerous. What is a hunter-gatherer to do after the 2nd or 3rd week without food? If these B vitamins are water-soluble and they're gone in 12 hours, how are we surviving? And it's obvious we always made them in our guts because that's how we evolved.
So I want to go down this, I think, did you want to talk about glyphosate and stuff today, or we can?
I think that's a completely different topic, but just know that it affects our B vitamins. Yeah.
So let's go back then, because I want to wrap up the sleep stuff by talking about your sleep restoration program. Can we talk about that?
Sure.
Tell me more about the actual program itself and what you're implementing to get patients better.
Right. Well, ultimately, when it comes to allopathic medicine, we have to understand that when somebody has apnea, we have to splint the airway open, because it's only an open airway that will allow you to enter into the deeper stages of sleep. If you are not sleeping properly, you're not healing, repairing. So just simply having that open airway, whether it's an oral device or a Cpap, will allow you to start to have normal sleep. And that's the beginning. Okay. Number 1. Number 2 is we've got to go to root cause. This all happened because the brainstem doesn't have enough vitamin D to make choline-acetyltransferase. And then your microbiome isn't making enough B vitamins. So we're going to restore the B vitamins. Now, for a lot of people, just raising the D level will give them back the microbiome that they need. Although over time, people need more and more B vitamins, because as you get into deeper sleep, your brain is remembering all the repairs it didn't make. And now you're using up your B vitamins, which are, utilizing your energy to fix what was broken that you never repaired. And this is one of Dr. Stasha Gomnick's theories, is that your brain remembers everything that it needs to repair. It's just deferring the maintenance until it's summer.
Yeah.
There you go. So I want to give my patients the tools to control their sleep throughout life, because everyone knows sleep is important. But aside from having a cool, dark room, what are you going to do besides putting your head down on a pillow? I have a program where I track my patients' sleep. I give them the tools, especially the different vitamins and supplements, to help them control their sleep. And so my goal is to regenerate the entire sleep program, which brings us to a whole different discussion of something called autophagy or autophagy, which is self-eating. So my program includes a system to be able to get into autophagy, to destroy the broken down brain cells and all the broken bits and parts that you've not been able to get rid of, and then to release stem cells from your bone marrow to regenerate the brain and the neurons. And this is fascinating because I do this in a 5-day fast, and my volleyball game has gotten so good by regenerating my cerebellum. It's shocking. I actually can see where I want to hit the ball, and I've never had that experience before. So it's only multiple cycles of autophagy and 5-day fasting that is going to regenerate the brain stem. Now, not everybody can do this, but everyone should. I came to the conclusion that if you want to be healthy and you don't want cancer and neurodegenerative disease, you're going to have to learn how to become metabolically flexible and how to do time-restricted feeding, and especially 5-day fast to be able to regenerate your body. And I have a program called Fast Club, and that is kind of a take on the movie Fight Club, to be able to incorporate a 5-day fast into your busy life. Because the issue isn't that you can't go without food. You can. You just don't know it yet. And all the social cues that we have are making it very difficult. I have done 18 or 19 5-day fasts. The first 10, I ate a lot of different food. It's called mimicking fasting, or I call it a fake fast. But now I barely need anything. I don't get hungry. And not only do I not feel weak, I feel energized. I have mental clarity, and I love to exercise in a fasted state. It's my favorite thing.
Right. So we've got the sleep restoration program, Fast Club. And before we move on to the next thing, I just wanted to go back to the fact that you said that sometimes with patients who've had chronic hypoxia, they get to a point where no amount of vitamin D is going to help them. Are there tests that patients can do to figure out where they are? Because it's quite a scary thought.
Well, of course, a sleep study is very useful in that. I have a very specific one that I love. It's called the WatchPat. A lot of the sleep testing equipment is just ass backwards. They put all these hoses on the nose, and you have a cannula which goes up your nose, and they're monitoring your nasal breathing. And it's asinine, because I don't care what the breathing is messed up, because it's the brain itself that's messed up. And so this particular tester goes on your finger and on your chest, and it measures the autonomic nervous system, and it registers these glitches that my entire industry doesn't know is caused by a vitamin D and a B vitamin deficiency. And it tells us the level of apnea. It will tell you your deep sleep, your REM sleep, and your desaturations, how many times you stop breathing per hour, which is your AHI, your apnea hypopnea index. So we have these readings that we can utilize. And what I do with all my sleep patients is I take an initial sleep study, and then down the road, we do it again, and we see, is the sleep improving? I wore my oral device for almost 4 years, and then I did a sleep study without it, and my AHI was so low that I stopped wearing my oral device. And I'm not the only one. I believe this syndrome is completely reversible. It's not that even it's that hard. It's the psychological component of understanding that our entire society is wrong, and that people are walking around eating the wrong fuel. They're eating sugar, and they're sugar burners, and we're designed to burn fat. You can think of what our bodies are like in that when you think of a hybrid car, you can burn gas, which causes pollution, or you can burn electricity, which is smooth and clean burning. And in our bodies, sugar and carbohydrates is gas, and fat, but only grass-fed organic fat, is electricity. And when you become fat adapted, your body no longer gets hungry every 3 hours and sends this hangry, angry signal to your brain to eat. And it's very liberating to become metabolically flexible. And I think that's the first step to be able to reverse the syndrome, because the brainstem itself will start to heal when you eliminate the inflammation caused by eating sugar every 3 hours.
Yeah. Okay, so I really want to talk about your book, because I know that you've been working really hard on it, and you're getting it to the publisher within the next few months. Is that right?
Well, I've been saying that for quite a while, but it has to be, what I'm saying goes so sharply against the entire dental and medical industry that when I put my stuff out there, it's so disruptive that I wanted it to be perfect, and I wanted to just put it all out there at one time with my cartoon characters and caricatures, and I wanted to put it out there in a way that it couldn't be subverted or hidden. I didn't want to say, hey, I'm a doctor, take vitamins, vitamin D is good for sleep. That's not who I am. When I discovered Weston Price and I saw what this man tried to do, he put these pictures in his book because at that time, that was the one way to reach the general public. He didn't care about his colleagues. They weren't interested in what he had to say. And that's what's happened to me. I approached multiple colleagues in medicine and dentistry, and I said in the most congenial way, hey there. So, and everybody basically said, I'm not interested, so get out of here, you weirdo. And so I decided to go to the general public. And I wanted to take what Weston Price was doing one step further, because he put this book out there with these photographs, and a picture's worth 1,000 words. And he even says that if you read at least the Introduction to Nutrition and Physical Degeneration, this man wanted to share his information, but it never got to me. If I would have learned his information when I was in dental school, it would have changed my life. Okay. And it didn't. And there isn't anyone who's really been willing to put this information out there in a meaningful way that has traction. And that's what I decided to do. So I created a whole entire world of cartoon characters to explain the story of our health in a way that will be fun, because people don't like science. They think it's boring. I think it's fascinating. But I wanted to create a complete change of culture, because the only way that someone like me, when I was a kid, if I could have been saved, is if everyone knew this. And that's what my goal is. My goal is to create a different paradigm that is so firmly entrenched into modern popular society that it can't ever be subverted again. I don't want any child to ever go through what I went through, because this is ridiculous. This is outrageous. This is not a disease of science. This is a disease of communication and messaging.
Because I've heard you say before about the fact that our children are being mutilated. Can you talk more a little bit more about that?
Well, at the most basic level, a tonsillectomy is mutilation. We do not want to cut any parts of our body out unless we absolutely have to. And the most tragic part about this is that tonsil size is inversely proportional to vitamin D status. And what that means in plain English is the bigger the tonsils, the lower the vitamin D level. So if you have a child that has chronically inflamed tonsils, the reason is because their immune system isn't working, because vitamin D regulates the immune system. And by simply raising the vitamin D level, the tonsils will shrink all on their own. Now, at a certain point, they may not shrink and they may have to be removed, but in children, this is such a reversible syndrome. So I want parents to know that it doesn't matter that their doctors think this is important. Your doctor is not sick, your child is. And you have an opportunity to reverse a syndrome that's so obvious. You can Google right now, tonsil size, vitamin D, PubMed, and press enter. And you may not be able to read the real science, but they always have a conclusion that's almost always understandable. And the conclusion was, we found that all these children, the bigger the tonsil, the lower the vitamin D level. And I shared this study with my pediatricians in my neighborhood. They didn't return my phone call. They don't care. This is really difficult. And so that's the most primary stage of mutilation. But imagine the children having their colons removed and having a colostomy. And I have a patient who's 23 years old, and she said, oh, my friend is so happy she had a colostomy. Her life's so much better at 23. And I asked her if she knew anything about vitamin D, and of course not. And just so everyone understands, it's not just the mutilation of someone with Crohn's disease or someone who has tonsils. This is at the root cause of every autoimmune disease. And this is ultimately one of the major components of cancer. Now, whether you want to believe that or not, vitamin D deficiency doesn't cause cancer. Vitamin D deficiency allows cancer to grow unchecked. I like to say this to my patients because they're like, haha, you know, Dr. Gould, you're crazy with your vitamin D stuff. And I say, listen, you're not going to find anyone out there with a vitamin D level of 50 nanograms and cancer. Those two conditions, they don't coexist. You won't find those things. So, you know, how important is this? Well, this is the root cause of autoimmune disease, neurodegenerative disease, and cancer. Like, come on. This is really shocking. It's shocking.
I wanted to talk about the characters that you have, because we know that there's vitamin D that's going to be there. We know that the K2 is there, but melatonin is there too. You can't talk about vitamin D basically without talking about melatonin, right? Sun and night.
Right.
Tell us about the importance. Tell us about the importance of melatonin.
Well, melatonin is, you know, everyone thinks this is just some thing you take for sleep. Melatonin is one of the most unique molecules that we know of. This is a molecule that is conserved unchanged amongst all phylum, and right down to phytoplankton. Phytoplankton are little tiny algae that you cannot see with the naked eye, and they comprise 50% of the Earth's biomass that gives us our oxygen, okay? Right down to the smallest little creature, melatonin is exactly the same. And this is Mother Nature's anti-cancer hormone. This is what's made in opposition to the solar radiation that we experience every day. And melatonin is a superhero in your body, and that's how I drew him. I drew him with the whitest skin, wearing red blue blocking glasses, because melatonin does not get made if you are in daylight or if you're exposed to blue light. So cancer, there was a study on blue light that it was classified as a class 2A carcinogen. They did some studies where they found that women who were doing the night shift had a much higher incidence of breast cancer. And what is it about this blue light that's toxic? Well, it destroys melatonin. Well, why is that important? Because melatonin reverses the damage of free radicals, and especially in the mitochondria. And of course, one of my main cartoon characters is Marty Mitochondria, because he is the most important character or person in our biology. And everything that happens in your health and in your life goes down inside that mitochondria. And it's in the mitochondria that melatonin is produced. And it's in the mitochondria that melatonin does its most powerful job, and that is eliminating the free radical damage that we produce from burning fuels. And so melatonin specifically is a powerful free radical scavenger. And it's not just that melatonin and its breakdown products destroy free radical damage, but melatonin will go to your DNA and will upregulate the production of your other antioxidant enzymes, glutathione and superoxide dismutase. And melatonin is such a cool dude that he puts his arm around glutathione, and they make a special complex called melatonin glutathione. And these guys are your anti-cancer, anti-free radical repair system. This is the cleanup crew that goes out into your body, or is supposed to go out into your body nightly, to reverse the free radical damage of living. And the reduction in melatonin is really means an increase in cancer. And when we discovered electricity and blue light, cancer increased because we changed our lives as animals that would always be sleeping within an hour or two of darkness. And we turned that on its ear by, thinking that we could outsmart Mother Nature by creating this artificial light. It's very tragic. And melatonin is critical to life and health.
So, there's an interesting statistic that I like to tell my patients about, and that is the fact that according to the government, which would be a conservative figure as it is, there is a 36% rate of vitamin D deficiency in Australia, despite our sun, during winter. And look, in winter, you can go to loads of parts of Australia and there's still full sun, all the rest of it. Some people are saying we've got a vitamin D deficiency because we've been so good at using sunscreen and all that kind of thing. But I suspect there's more to it than that. What are your thoughts on sunscreen, vitamin D deficiency despite adequate sunlight, that kind of stuff? Talk to me.
That's a complex and loaded question, and I'm already so far off the ranch with what I'm saying. I think sunscreen causes cancer. It doesn't prevent it. I think it's toxic to our environment.
Hey, look, you're not that far off the ranch, because the FDA released that report in July 2019, which actually said, right, that whoopsies, these 4 chemicals that are used in sunscreen, we used to tell everyone that they're not absorbed by the body and doesn't get into your bloodstream. Oopsie, it does. And in fact, you apply it day 1, day 2, day 7, I can still find these chemicals in your blood. So they not to scare anyone, but they're basically saying, what this means is that we now need some safety data. We need to do more tests on this, right? Because there haven't been tests done about the safety of these chemicals in our body, because we were told that they weren't being absorbed. Anyway, apart from that, do you actually find that there are patients who, despite adequate sun exposure, aren't getting the vitamin D levels up?
Absolutely, because there's a couple of other things that are lowering our vitamin D level, and they're very interesting. Of course, they're associated with modern living. The first is carbohydrate consumption. Even that alone will lower your vitamin D level, and it's a little bit interesting as to why. And the other is that EMFs, electromagnetic frequency, electromagnetic radiation, the Wi-Fi and the Bluetooth, and now this 5G and all this extra radiation, we don't feel this, but this is a stress on our bodies. And radiation in your body just like radiation in your microwave, it starts to cook whatever is being irradiated. And when you irradiate a human, you cause free radical damage. And that free radical damage is noticed by your body, and you will use up whatever available vitamin D you have to repair that free radical damage. Now, when you eat carbohydrates, this opens the door to a completely different discussion.
Wait, let's qualify
Sure.
carbohydrates, because I
Sure.
think that carbohydrates as a whole have been demonized, but they're one of the 3 macronutrients. What kind of carbohydrates are you talking about?
Well, processed carbohydrates, absolutely, sugar, high fructose corn syrup, but really all of the foods that we didn't have in our evolutionary history, except for fruit. And then we need to think about the fruit that we have today. It's much sweeter because it's been crossbred. But all of these carbohydrates, especially the processed ones, these are unnatural to us because they're broken down, and they're flooding our bodies with a substance that we absorb by the name of deuterium. Okay, and that opens the door to a completely different discussion of what is deuterium and why does it affect us. And this is really a fascinating discussion because we've opened the door to mortality itself. Deuterium is a stable hydrogen isotope, and that shouldn't mean anything to you unless you're a physicist. But what that means is that we have 2 versions of hydrogen in our body. One is regular hydrogen called protium, and the other is an isotope, which is called deuterium. And that comes from the Greek word deuteros, or double. And what this explains is really that hydrogen is the simplest and most abundant element on this planet. It has 1 electron and 1 proton. That's what makes up hydrogen. Deuterium has an extra neutron. And that's what an isotope is. An isotope is a different version of an element. And everyone's heard of carbon-14 or carbon dating. So carbon-14 is an isotope of carbon, which has a molecular weight of 12. But what's interesting about deuterium is that when you take hydrogen and you add a neutron, you double the weight. And this changes everything. So this different version of hydrogen is a natural component of the physical world. This was created in the Big Bang. A specific amount of deuterium exists on this planet, and all of life works around this. I think this is fascinating because this is the difference between 0 and 1, off and on. I think that deuterium dictates lifespan, and when enough deuterium builds up in your body, the cholesterol that is a huge component of your skin starts to get this deuterium incorporated into it. And if you have enough cholesterol with deuterium, it's called deuterated cholesterol. When sunlight strikes your skin, that deuterium will prevent the amount of vitamin D being made that you're used to having. So over time, scientists know that over time we make less vitamin D in our skin, but they didn't know why. Well, this is probably the reason that as deuterium builds up in the tissues of your body over time, it decreases the amount of vitamin D you can make because that bond of hydrogen to carbon in cholesterol is very strong when it's a deuterium atom, and it's harder to break that one bond that transforms cholesterol into vitamin D. And for anyone who doesn't know that, cholesterol is the precursor to vitamin D, or 7-dehydroxycholesterol, if you want to be technical. It's a version of cholesterol. So what's fascinating about deuterium is that the more carbohydrates you eat, even if you spend time in the sun, you will make less vitamin D. And I think that's what aging really is.
Yeah, and let's not forget as well that, a lot of us will be metabolizing deuterium when we sleep, when we have good quality and that length of sleep that we need. And if we're not getting the sleep, we're not metabolizing, or we're not getting rid of the deuterium in our system either. So
it's called deuterium depletion. You're not getting rid of deuterium. You're getting rid of it in REM sleep if you're getting into normal stages of sleep. And this stuff will build up. And when it builds up in your brainstem, this deuterium slows down the production of energy in your mitochondria. It literally is what metabolic disease is. That's why eating a lot of sugar, high fructose corn syrup, and processed foods causes obesity and metabolic disease. This deuterium slows down our body's ability to produce energy to begin with.
Mm-hmm. And deuterium is one of the characters in your book, is that right?
Absolutely. I have heroes and villains. My villains are glyphosate and deuterium, and my heroes are the different organic components and mineral components of our food chain that have been removed and how they interact with sunlight. My cartoon characters are called heroes of light, and these are the characters. I kind of like to think of them as the stars or the celebrities of your body that we need to pay attention to. these are really the stars of our lives. And that's why I wanted to personify them and make them, instead of saying vitamin D and magnesium, I want to give you a visual. I want these cartoon characters to enter into the consciousness of children in grade school, so that they can learn about this. This is important.
Yeah. So I think we're sort of getting to the end of it now, but there's another character of yours, specifically sulfur, which through you, I learned the importance of which. Did you want to just talk very quickly about sulfur?
Sure. Well, okay. So if you're listening to this podcast, you're probably already enlightened that a high-fat diet, as long as it's grass-fed and organic, is a good thing. You probably think butter is good and eating meat is good for you, which it is. You know, the foods that we evolved on cannot suddenly become toxic unless we feed them glyphosate and give them corn and grain. But if eating fat doesn't give you heart disease, then what does? What is the root cause of heart disease? What is it? And, you know, I've asked this question to many intelligent people and no one seems to have figured this out. So I found a very unique, specific scientist by the name of Stephanie Seneff. And she has a completely different perspective on reality. And she, through her investigation of autism, came to the conclusion that most of humanity is suffering from a sulfate deficiency, which at its root cause is a lack of sulfur in our environment. And that means in the food chain, in the soil, in the plants that grow, in the animals that eat them. And once we don't have enough sulfur, this profoundly affects our vasculature, our circulation, and almost every mucous membrane or biologic barrier surface on our body. And so what she's discovered, and this is genius, it's so simple, is that this one thing, this sulfur deficiency, is at the core of just almost every modern disease. And after seeing her science and even just thinking about the laws of physics, I think she's right. And you know, it's a very simple equation, is that sulfur was always incorporated into our food chain and we had it in abundance. And in your body, sulfur is so critical. It's the main component in some of your most important amino acids, but this sulfur is supposed to be joined to cholesterol. And then, you know, just to sort of, you know, go into a different direction, our bodies have two zones. And this is what my graphic novel is about, Heroes of Light. And there's two zones in your body. There's the zone of fats and cell membranes, and there's a zone of water, or the aqueous zone. And cholesterol is hydrophobic. It's what your cell membranes and your fats are made of. And the rest of your body, your cytoplasm, is water. And so cholesterol is hydrophobic. It cannot be sent out in your blood. And cholesterol is your major repair molecule. It's a precursor to testosterone and estrogen and so many different molecules. It's so critical to life that when your body cannot get this cholesterol where it's supposed to go, it puts it into boats that we call HDLs and LDLs. Those are special carrier molecules where we put our cholesterol in because it has to be protected from the water. But when you're in sunlight and you have adequate sulfur, what's supposed to happen is that a specific enzyme called endothelial nitric oxide synthase, ENOS for short, which is one of my cartoon characters, this enzyme joins cholesterol and sulfur together. Now you have cholesterol, which is hydrophobic. She is the queen of the hydrophobes in my graphic novel. And sulfur is king of the hydrophiles. And they get together through the power of sunlight. When cholesterol and sulfur get together, they become cholesterol sulfate. And I call this the perfect molecule because it's not hydrophobic, it's not hydrophilic, it's amphiphilic, meaning that it can go into your blood and scooch into your cell membranes to deliver cholesterol to wherever it goes. The sulfur stays in your blood vessels, in your fascia, and your mucous membranes, and its negative charge creates something called easy water or exclusion zone, which is a gelled water that is supposed to be found in abundance in all of our biologic systems. This phase of water is a gel, and this is produced in our bodies by movement and sunlight, and it's that gelled water that helps our enzymes have the 3D shape they need to be active. And so this is a critical component of our biology, and without enough sulfur, we don't have enough negative charge to keep our blood vessels and our red blood cells flowing smoothly, and our hearts have to pump harder. So I believe that sulfur deficiency is at the root cause of heart disease. And I think it's more simple than people can imagine.
So I'm going to use that as a bit of a teaser to link everyone to the podcast that you did with Stephanie Seneff, actually, just so that they can, so that they're able to read, to watch the entire podcast that you did with her, which was fascinating, by the way. And so just to round it all out, I know that people are going to want to know more about you. So please let them know about where they can find your YouTube channel, how they can learn more about when your book is coming out, your sleep restoration program, your fast club, and also your work with Sapien Health.
Right. So I've joined a group of like-minded doctors at sapien.org, and these, I believe, are some of the most forward-thinking, influential people. We are trying to share this information in a meaningful way and bring it out into society. If people want to find me as a dentist and as a sleep apnea, sleep restoration expert, they can go to my website at Modern American Dentistry, and that's where you can find out all about my professional career. And then my YouTube channel is called Modern Hunter-Gatherers, because our biology is that of a hunter-gatherer, though the life we're living is not a match for what we evolved to be. And on that YouTube channel, you'll see my previous podcasts, my new current information, and information about my new website called modernhuntergatherers.com. It's not launched yet, but this is where I'll be hosting my new podcast called Revolution Radio, and that's an emphasis on the evolution. And I'm calling this the most disruptive channel on the planet, because the experts that I'm interviewing are bringing information forward that's so revolutionary, and it's really disruptive. So I really look forward to sharing this new podcast. As for my book is called The Modern Epidemic. It is not published yet, and I'm still looking for a publisher. My goal is to have this debut on the New York Times bestseller list, hopefully at #1. So if anyone out there wants a really great read and wants to contact me, it's just one of a couple of books that I've already written on these subjects, and I can't wait to share this information with the general public, because this has been painful for me, knowing what I know and not to be able to get this message out there. And I really want this to be a fun, positive, organic way for people to really understand that there's a different way to think about our health and a different paradigm, one of sleep and restoration, and one of organic, natural health, where we can get rid of and get off of these pharmaceutical medications and live the life that Mother Nature designed us to have.
Fantastic. Joel, I very much look forward to inviting you to London to hang out with the Healthy Ambition team and to get you on stage, because I believe that your message does need to be heard. And of course, to invite you to Australia as well, which is where I, Dr. Olivia, am based. But till next time, thank you so much for spending the time with us.
My pleasure. It was fun. Thank you very much.